Medina, a faculty member of the Wharton School of Social Service. This is an event to you brought by the Wharton School. I want to welcome and acknowledge also some of our faculty members who are joining us tonight from the Wharton School. We'll skip Cora for now. And doing so, we recognize her. Phyllis, Dr. Phyllis Thompson is here. Sorry, Phyllis, see, good. I'm getting people eating. Dr. Venus Choi is also one of our faculty members. And then as Cora who raised her hand, I also want to thank other faculty members for joining us this evening. And Sister Joyce. Does everyone know Sister Joyce? If not, you should know Sister Joyce and visit her office in the Elliott House. Sister Joyce is our, correct me, University Minister. I was going to say campus minister. Anyway, so tonight we're also collaborating with the Congregation of Divine Providence. And we felt at the Wharton School that this was really fitting because the congregation adopts issues that they think are extremely important to work around. And so the death penalty is something that they would like to see abolished. And so one of the things that they do that illustrate their commitment is any day that there's an execution scheduled, they hold a silent vigil outside of the convent to recognize that a human life is about to be taken by the state. And so I'm going to welcome Sister Louise, and she will welcome our two guests here this evening.
And you can also hear me without the mic. Good. This evening I have the pleasure to introduce these two special people up here on the platform. And there are two people who have allowed their lives to really be transformed spiritually, but also to live a very unconditional love in their life. Bill Pelke, I should have practiced that, is the president of a co-founder of the Journey of Hope, From Violence to Healing. He's also written a book by that same name where he details some of his experiences. He also serves on a number of boards, and when you listen to some of these, it gives you his priorities in life. He's a board member of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. He's the founding board member of Murder Victims, Families, and Human Rights. He's an incorporator of Murder Victims, Families for Reconciliation, and he's also on the board for the Alaskans Against the Death Penalty. We also have with us Charity Reed, and she's the founder of the Ella Foundation. And I noticed there were some brochures back there, and I'm sure as she speaks, you will hear more about Ella, which is the name of her daughter, but also it's a foundation, a nonprofit based here in San Antonio, and its mission is to prevent violence, to advocate for human rights through education, criminal justice reform, and victim advocacy. And when you look at the words ELLA, E, empathy, L, love, L, lessons, and A, actions. And Charity also comes with us with a vast amount of services that she does within our community. And she does a lot of service hours with FACT, which is the Family Assistance Crisis Team, also the Bexar County Family Justice Center. And I noticed that she's been recognized with the Peace Initiative, the Phoenix Award, which is a volunteer category, I believe. And the San Antonio Police Department also has given her an Outstanding Service Award now, I think in May of 2011. And she lives by the motto, love does conquer all. And so welcome to Bill and Jill.
I'm going to stay sitting down. We've been on the road for 25 days. We just got back from Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya. use any notes the entire time, so I felt quite at a loss. And I wrote this speech right after Troy Davis was executed, and I've been waiting to use it on somebody. So, you guys are going to get the full effect of the fully written speech. I promise it still comes from my heart. So, my name is Charity Lee. In 1990, when I was only 6 years old, my father, James Robert Bennett Jr., was shot multiple times in the back with a .357 Magnum early one morning in our home. His accused killer was arrested, charged, tried, and acquitted. Had she not been acquitted, the killer would have faced the death penalty. And I know this woman very well because she is my mother. In 2007, my 4-year-old daughter, Ella Lee Bennett, was sexually assaulted, beaten, choked, and stabbed 17 times late one night in our home. Minutes after her death, her killer called 911 to turn himself in. I know her killer well also, because he is my son. Had he not been a juvenile, he too would have faced the death penalty. I do not stand or sit in this case before you to dwell upon the violence that has permeated and poisoned my life. I do not stand before you to rattle off statistics nor regale you with stories of misery, pain, and loss. I stand before you to speak as the daughter of a murdered father, the mother of a murderer, and the mother of a murdered child. I stand before you as a woman whose entire life has been shaped and defined by violence and murder. I stand before you to tell you how after I have been forced to look violence in the face time after time again, I learned to continue with love in spite of the horror that violence has shown me. I stand before you to show you what I have learned and continue to learn from my father, my son, and my daughter about the nature and expression of unconditional love. I stand before you with the hope that my pain and my losses will save you from experiencing and enduring the depths of pain and despair that I daily live with. I stand before you to encourage you to act in your world with empathy and love, not with anger and violence. I stand before you to tell you how I have learned to cope with and transform the senseless violence that daily destroys our lives, our families, our friends, our community, and our society into something beautiful and meaningful. I stand before you to testify that a life full of murder, loss, and unspeakable grief has taught me everything I have ever needed to know about love. I stand before you an example of the power of unconditional love. I have survived a lifetime of murder. I live and now work on both sides of the crime scene tape. I have never seen a murder, whether it be by an individual or by a government, bring anything but pain into our world. There is no such thing as closure for the victims, for the offenders, or for our families after a murder has occurred. Pain does not disappear when one act of murder has been carried out. It only tightens its grip on our hearts. Pain never disappears, but with unconditional love, pain does and can become bearable. Because I am the daughter of a murdered father, the mother of a murderer, and the mother of a murdered child, I know 4 facts to be irrevocably true. These are my truths. Truth number 1, love does conquer all. I have seen it at work in my life and in the lives of countless others that I counsel and support in their darkest moments. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I will say it again because truth with a capital T needs to be shouted from the rooftops as often as possible. Love begets love. Hate begets hate. Love is the only force powerful enough to conquer hate. If you want to live in a world free of hate and violence, you have to stop being hateful. Learn to set aside your ego, your pride, your anger, your insults, your righteous indignation, and your judgment, and instead learn to flex your empathy muscles. Learn to use your words wisely. Learn that your words are powerful, and learn to use that power for good, for justice, and for love. Everyone in this room will suffer a traumatic event in their life. At least one of you will die because of one. Love for yourself and love for another is the only way to prevent and heal from this trauma. Truth number 2. I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Violence is so prevalent and so accepted in our culture. What happened to my loved ones, my family, can and may happen to any one of you in spite of your best efforts. We are all an eye blink away from trauma. After my father was murdered, then again after Paris killed Ella, many people in my life and in the community put as much distance as they could between themselves and me. As a child, I was shunned and taunted by my classmates, by children who listened and believed their parents when they said my mother was a murderess. Children who every time they got mad at me for some small slight, threw my father's murder into my face as if it were somehow my fault, my crime, my burden to bear. As an adult, I am verbally attacked by people I have never met nor seen before in my life. People who assume I must be evil because they think my son is. People who assume I must be, at best, a closet criminal, or at worst, a horrible mother because of what my son chose to do. Communities I was once part of shunned me in my darkest hours and times of greatest need. Exactly 1 week before Ella's murder, I was at the breakfast table with my children. And I opened the local paper and I read the tragic story of Janie De La Paz, a 4-year-old girl murdered in a drive-by shooting. The first thought that entered my mind was, how horrible. The second, thank God that will never happen to me. I never once thought of reaching out to her family, never once thought to offer them my support, and never once thought to do anything to stop these senseless acts of violence. My only thought was, how lucky I am. My children are happy and whole. How lucky we are. We will never face that kind of tragedy because we are different from the De La Pazes. Because I used to be guilty of the same offense, I understand why we distance ourselves from tragedy and shun those who have experienced it. Fear. Plain and simple fear. No one wants to believe the horror that befell my family can happen to theirs. No one wants to believe their Ella, their Jamie, their father can be murdered. No one wants to believe their Paris, their mother, or their loved one can commit murder. I am living proof that you should all believe it possible. Do not distance yourself from those in need. Do not shun those who have been traumatized. This only causes more pain. Ignoring the problem of violence will not make it stop at your doorstep. Truth number 3, life is to be lived boldly. Ralph Waldo Emerson said it best, do not be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment. I believe after surviving the worst nightmares I've ever had, after surviving a life bookended by murder, that I have been called to be a healer of hearts and souls. Living the life of a daughter of a murdered father, the mother of a murderer and a murder victim, has only served to increase the amount of love and compassion I feel for each person I encounter. Every moment I have experienced thus far has led me to one unassailable belief. The most important thing I do in my life is to help anyone, and I mean anyone at all, to remember that life is meaningful, and no matter how untrue this may feel at the time, that they are meaningful to life. I have a mantra I live by. Love, sacrifice, service. These three spiritual truths form the basis of my ethical code, my worldview, and guide my exchanges with others. These truths transcend all boundaries of age, color, gender, sexual orientation, class, nationality, religion, and language. We all have a story that deserves to be heard, and we all have different ways of sharing our story. We all have moments we are unable to see the essential role we play in life. Whether we are blinded by choice or by chance makes no difference in our experience of being blind. At some point, we will all need a mustard seed of faith planted by our positive experience of another to continue to live our life the best we can and to be able to grow in all of life's seasons. Stop worrying about what everyone will think of you. Stop worrying about the label on your shirt, the car that you drive, or the size of your house. Stop worrying about keeping up with your neighbors. Focus the energy you waste on fear and worry on empathy, compassion, and love instead. Imagine what an amazing world we would live in if we could all do this. And finally, truth number 4. I am convinced, beyond the shadow of any doubt, that the only reason I survived my personal hell is to accomplish 4 monumental goals. I survived to share my love and my story with anyone who needs it and is willing to listen. I survived to offer my time and my heart to all victims of violence I meet. I survived to rattle the bars of the criminal justice system a bit by advocating for justice and humane treatment rather than punishment for those who do us harm. And finally, when I am done surviving hell, when goals 1 through 3 are accomplished and life sees fit to let me go, I will have survived to hold my daughter again. 4 years of holding Ella was not enough. So on April 12th, 2011, what would have been Ella's 9th birthday, I created the Ella Foundation, a nonprofit based here in San Antonio, Texas, whose mission is to prevent violence and to advocate for human rights through education, criminal justice reform, and victim advocacy efforts. I created the Ella for one reason, self-evident. It can do more good, spread more love than one woman alone. The Ella Foundation is currently at work on the following projects, which is why I am not here in school with you guys. I had a good reason. Publication of How Now Butterfly, my memoir on the loss of my children. The coordination of local, national, and international agencies and nonprofits to build support for humane treatment of both victims and offenders in an effort to reduce crime and victimization. Local, national, and international speaking engagements in which I incorporate my personal experience and professional knowledge of family violence and juvenile crime to educate the public in violence prevention and human rights, and the development of, in conjunction with the Victim Advocacy and Homicide Division of the SAPD, an agency-wide volunteer-based crisis intervention program. See what you have to look forward to one day? Very professional sounding, isn't it? I call my volunteers Team Ella because there are 4 things someone caught in the cycle of violence needs to stop and overcome violence in their life. They need empathy. They need us to understand their pain. They need love, because love is not the same thing as empathy. You can understand somebody and still not love them. You have to give them your love too. They have to feel it. They need lessons. The only way to survive trauma is to know what you're in for, or at least the best educated guess. And it's only through others being able to tell us, like social workers, advocates, other people, that they begin to have an idea what they're in for and what is out there for them. Because the last thing that you want to leave them with is the ability to take action. They have to be able to act as time goes on. If I had continued to wallow in my rage and pain. I would not do any of this. Trauma can be beautiful. We just have to be able to act on it. My goal and mission in life is for the Ella Foundation to one day have the means to open community restoration centers, named, of course, Ella's Place, in actively crime-ridden communities, which will offer support and education to all victims of violent crime. No matter which side of the crime scene tape our clients must cross to find us to begin to heal. And this is where the speech gets difficult for me. My son murdered his sister 3 months after his 13th birthday. For his birthday, I sat down and composed a list that sums up 13 things loving him taught me. 3 years later, my son turned 16 in the custody of the Texas Youth Commission. I could not bake him a cake, throw him a party, teach him to drive, take him to get a driver's license, or marvel over what an impressive and amazing my child had grown to be. So I sat down and I added 3 more to his list and I mailed it to him. I'd like to share with you what my son has taught me about love. To my beloved son on his 13th birthday, 13 things loving you has taught me. 1. Live in the here and now. The past cannot be changed and the future is yours for the creating. 2. Live without limits but set boundaries. 3. Love boldly yet carefully. 4. Be mindful of others' dreams and aspirations. Offer support and encouragement often. 5. Know your limits. Trust your instincts. Do not be afraid to draw lines in the sand. 6. Follow your yellow brick road. It always knows where you need to be. 7. Stop and listen to the silence occasionally to remind yourself that life is not always as it seems. 8. Trust until given a reason not to. Help until you are being taken advantage of. 9. Hold no regrets. Life is too short, and you are the sum of all your experiences, both good and bad. 10. Never be afraid to admit your mistakes or apologize for them. You will be a better man than most because of it. 11. Try not to let the actions of a few jade your opinion of all. 12. Good manners will take you farther than any amount of money or talent. And 13. When all else fails, remind yourself that this is your life and you have to live it the best way that you feel is best. To my beloved son on his 16th birthday, it has been a long, hard trip getting here, but I would not change any of it. What is. You still teach me so much about love, so here are 3 more for your list. Always let love be your guide and light at the end of your tunnel. As long as you keep breathing, you can survive anything. Even if you quit, you survive everything anyway. No matter who you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what you may do, I always have, and I always will love you to the stars and back. If we must fight, it is time to fight for justice. And if we must fight, it is time to fight for humanity. And if we must fight, the only weapons we should arm ourselves with are empathy, compassion, and love. These are the only weapons that will make our world a better and more humane place to exist. My name is Charity, and my name means love. My daughter's name is Ella. And her name now means empathy, love, lessons, and action. I believe in the power of charity. and I definitely believe in the power of Ella. And I believe that if we all do our best to live with love and empathy, do our best to share our lessons, and do our best to act with love when needed, we can, and we may, and we will stop the violence that is killing us all. And now, y'all are the first ones to hear my new speech. I'm gonna get some next.
It's hard to say anything after that. We will have a little bit of time after I talk for people that have questions for Charity. If there's anything you want to ask her, she'll be happy to talk. I'm not sure what the time frame is, how much time we have. Okay. Well, my name is Bill Pelke. I'm the president of the Journey of Hope for Violence to Healing. The Journey is a support group led by murder victim family members, and we travel around the country and around the world. We share our stories of from violence to healing. And as we share our stories, led by murder victim family members, we talk about how the death penalty has nothing to do with the healing that murder victim family members need after a loved one has been killed, but how in fact it continues that cycle of violence and creates more murder victim family members. And as we do our speaking tours, we're joined by people who have loved ones on death row. They share what it's like to have somebody they love very much, a brother, a son, a husband, a father sitting on that death row cell waiting for when the state says today is the day they're going to kill their loved one. We're also joined by people that have had loved ones executed by the state. The trip that we just made to Africa, where Charity went, we also were joined by Bill Babbitt of California, whose brother Manny Babbitt was executed by the state of California. And we also had Randy Gardner with us. His brother was executed last year in the state of Utah, shot through the heart by firing squad. And so they shared their stories of what it was like for them and for their families. In fact, Randy will talk about how his brother Ronnie's daughter, who was 7 years old when he was sentenced to death, I think she was like 36 when he was executed. She thought she'd be able to deal with it. But she found out she couldn't. She's trying to kill herself after her father was executed. So the death penalty affects more than just a person who will be dragged out of the cage on a certain day and executed, but how it affects their family members. It really is cruel and barbaric. And we're also joined on our tours by people that have been sentenced to death in various states here in this country for crimes that they didn't commit. Statistics from the Death Penalty Information Center say 138 people have been sentenced to death for crimes they didn't commit in this country since the death penalty was reinstituted. Just Saturday, there was a march in Austin that was led by 25 exonerated death row inmates, and each one of them got there and said, I was sentenced to death for a crime I didn't commit. If it had been up to the state of such and such, I'd be a dead man today. And they talk about how their lives were saved, not by the system, but in spite of the system. And so as we travel and share our stories and put a personal touch, we are able to touch other people's hearts and get them to rethink their positions on the death penalty. Because a lot of times people say, well, if you kill, you should be killed. But it's a whole lot deeper than that. I'll share with you a little bit of my story of how I got involved. It was May 14th of 1985. On this day, there were 4 girls. They were 9th grade students at the Wallace High School in Gary, Indiana, the high school my father went to. It was the lunch hour. In those days, during lunchtime, the students could leave the school grounds. They could go to Burger King, Taco Bell, McDonald's, whatever, have lunch, and then come back to school. But when these 4 girls left, they knew they were going to come back to school. They were going to ditch, play hooky for the rest of the day. They went to one of the girls' homes that lived near the school. There was nobody there but 4 girls. They sat around the dining table, and they drank some beer, they drank some wine, they smoked some marijuana. And then they began to talk about what they were going to do for the rest of the day, because they had the afternoon free. They could do whatever they wanted to do. They decided they would like to play video arcade games at the local arcade a couple blocks away on Broadway, the main street that runs through Gary. But they had one problem: they didn't have any money. So they began to talk among themselves about how they could get some money. Finally, the girl who was home there asked, "We know there's an old lady. She lives across the alley from where I live. She lives alone. I think she has money. She teaches Bible lessons in the neighborhood." She told the other three girls, "If you can go knock on her door and tell her you'd like to do Bible lessons, I think she'll let you in the house. And when you get in the house, you can rob her. And I can stay back as a lookout because the old lady would recognize me." And so the girls agreed on that plan. A short time later, three of the girls went up and they knocked on my grandmother's door. My grandmother answered the door and he said, "Mrs. Pelke, we'd like to take your Bible lessons." And my grandmother, who we called Nana, told the girls to come on into the house. And to know Nana, this is what Nana would do. Nana was a very religious woman, loved God very much, was very involved in all the services of the local Baptist church a couple blocks away. Seemed like whenever those church doors were open, she was there. Sunday morning for Sunday school, then the morning worship service, go back on Sunday night for Bible training hour, and then for evening worship service. On Wednesday nights was choir practice, which would follow the permanent. She would always go to. Tuesday nights was youth club for boys clubs and girls clubs. She was involved in church visitation on Thursdays for people that come to church the previous Sunday, invite them to come back again and answer any questions about the church. Saturdays she would go visitation to the sick and shut-in, take tapes of the previous sermon and pray with people for their health. She was involved in the Women's Missionary Society. Whenever those church doors were open, she was there. But her real love, her real passion was telling Bible stories to young people. And she used to travel throughout the city of Gary telling flannel graph Bible stories. Flannel graph Bible stories were probably a lot of you have never seen them, but something was on an easel. There was a board a couple foot wide, about a foot and a half tall, and it had flannel material over it. Then she had cut out pictures of Bible characters, and she would put these up on the board, and she would change them, and she would tell stories. I remember as a kid telling about Noah and the ark, and having the ark up there, and putting up the animals going on 2 by 2, and 3 men in a fiery furnace, and Daniel in the lion's den. And my favorite story is about Joseph and his coat of many colors. I used to love it when she would take that beautiful, colorful coat and put that up on the character of Joseph, and there would be the brothers standing off on the side of their plain drab brown robes, and how they got jealous and traded him into slavery. I used to love her to see that story. But when I got older and had kids of my own, I was able to watch Nana tell my kids and their friends these same Bible stories. It's what she loved to do. And so at the age of 7, 8 years old, it was one more chance for her to share her faith in God with other people when she told the girls to come in. The girls came into the house. Nana turned her back to get some information on the Bible classes. And one of the girls grabbed the vase off the end table and hit her over the head. And as Nana fell to the floor, another girl pulled a knife out of the purse and began to stab her. While this girl was stabbing Nana, the other 2 girls went through the house looking for money. They came back a short time later where the girl was still stabbing Nana, and they told her, "We can't find any money." So that girl got angry. She gave the another girl the knife, and she began to go through the house, pulling out the dresser drawers in the bedrooms and the living room, and just ransacking the house looking for money. The girls came up with a total of $10 and the keys to Nana's old car. And they took her old car and went back to high school. They left a few hours earlier to see if any of their friends wanted to go joyriding. And Nana died on the dining room floor of her home. My father found Nana's body the next day. And you can imagine what a terrible thing it was for him to walk in the house that day and find Nana's body in the blood. What a terrible thing it was for our entire family and somebody we loved so dearly who had died such a horrendous death. The girls were arrested the next day, and immediately it came out in the paper that the state of Indiana was going to try each of the girls as adults. It was going to seek the death penalty on all 4 girls. Now, when the trials actually began a year later, they dropped the death penalty charges on 2 of the girls. The girl that had known Nana, set Nana up, did not go in the house when the murder took place, but she was sentenced to 25 years in prison for her role in robbery and murder. The girl was accused of hitting Nana over the head with a vase, was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The 2 girls that were charged with handling a knife, the state of Indiana still wanted the death penalty. The first girl that went before the judge said, "I am guilty." The judge had a choice to either give her the death penalty or Indiana's alternative at that time of 60 years in prison. The judge elected to give her 60 years in prison. He said the reason he wasn't giving her the death penalty was because she had been under the influence of a dominating personality. The last girl to go before the judge was a girl that he was talking about, with a dominating personality. Her name was Paula Cooper. Paula Cooper was 15 years old at the time of the murder. She would be the ringleader because she was the girl that had brought the knife into the house and inflicted the majority of the stab wounds. When she went before the judge, Paula Cooper also said, "I am guilty." So once again, there was no criminal trial, just to sit here and determine what her fate would be. I took off work that day and I went to the sentencing hearing, and I watched as the prosecution spent 2.5 hours saying why this girl should be put to death. My father was one of the witnesses for the prosecution. My father testified what he saw that day when he walked into the house. He identified pictures that were taken at the crime scene. And when he was asked what he thought the punishment should be, he said it would be a travesty of justice if she didn't get the death penalty. And then I watched as the defense spent 1.5 hours saying why she shouldn't get the death penalty. And then the judge gave his verdict. And I'll never forget the words of the judge that day. He stated when he had graduated from Loyola Law School back in 1959, he said there was one thing that he knew for sure. He said he knew he was opposed to the death penalty. He went on to say that at that time, the majority of people in this country were opposed to the death penalty. But he talked about how the pendulum had changed and had swung to the direction where now the majority of the people in this country wanted, he said, in fact, demanded the death penalty. And he said that he hoped that someday soon, the American people would have their fill of the blood that was shed by this penalty and would come to an end. Then he said, however, according to the laws of the state of Indiana, he said, I have no choice. And he sentenced Paula Cooper to death. And she became the youngest female on death row in America. And I didn't have a problem with that. I knew we had a death penalty in this country and people were being put to death, sentenced to death and executed. And I felt if they didn't give the death penalty to the person who killed Nana, and they were telling me and my family that Nana was not an important enough person to merit the perpetrator being put to death. And I felt Nana was a very, very important person, so for that reason alone, I had no problem when the death sentence was given. I remember as I walked out of the courtroom, television cameras were present, and they asked me for my opinion on what had just happened. And I said, well, I felt like the judge did what he had to do. But if fighting back tears, I said, but it won't bring my grandmother back. And that was on July 11th of 1986. It was 3.5 months later, November 2nd, 1986, where I was at work at Bethlehem Steel, where I've been employed as an overhead crane operator for about 20 years. It was a Sunday afternoon shift, 311 shift, was what we call a downturn. And my only job was for people, mechanics on the floor that needed to move heavy equipment around and make repairs, would call me and I would assist them. I had a period of time where I didn't have any work to do, and I began to reflect on my grandmother's life and on my grandmother's death. And I found myself doing something that night that I had not done in 1.5 years since her death, but I began asking my God, why? Why had he allowed one of his most precious angels to suffer such a horrendous death? Why? And I asked God why our family, a good family, had to suffer so much. And I had been raised, you don't ask God why, you just accept what happens and you go on with life. But I found myself that night asking God why. As I thought about Nana, I thought about her death, and I began to think about her Christian way of life. And my mind went back to the courtroom on the day where Paula Cooper had been sentenced to death. And I recall that just as the judge had begun to deliver the sentence of death, there was no man sitting on the galley. Just began to cry and to wail very loudly, "They're going to kill my baby! They're going to kill my baby!" And the judge looked over to the bailiff and told the bailiff to escort that man out of the courtroom because he was disrupting the proceedings. And I watched as the old man was led by me out of the courtroom with tears running out of his eyes and streaming down his cheeks. It was Paula Cooper's grandfather. I also recall Paula Cooper being led off to death row. Shortly before the judge dismissed her, she had an opportunity to say something to all of us, and she did say that she was sorry for what she'd done. And I remember her walking off with these tears coming out of her eyes and streaming down her cheeks. She was wearing a light blue prison dress with dark blotches all over the dress from the tears. And then I began to picture an image of my grandmother. There had been a very beautiful picture taken of my grandmother shortly before her death, and whenever newspapers did a story about her death, or about the trials that took place, or about the death sentence being given, they would show this one very beautiful picture. And I began to picture an image of this picture in my mind as I sat up and praying that night. But with one distinct difference. I pictured tears coming out of Nana's eyes and streaming down Nana's cheeks. And I knew that they were tears of love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family. I began to think about Nana's faith, the Christian faith, and I immediately thought of three things. The first thing I thought about was the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, where Jesus said, if you want your Father in heaven to forgive you, you need to forgive other people. And then I thought about when Jesus was talking with the disciples, teaching them about forgiveness. St. Peter didn't quite understand everything that was going on. He questioned Jesus. He said, well, how many times are you supposed to forgive? 7 times? And And Jesus responded by saying 70 times 7. And I knew that Jesus wasn't saying to forgive 490 times and you don't have to forgive anymore. But Jesus was saying that by then forgiveness should be a habit, it should be a way of life. To forgive, 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 and keep on forgiving. And as I said on that prayer night, I also envisioned when Jesus was crucified. And I pictured that crown of thorns in his brow and nails in his hands and his feet. And Jesus looking upward and saying, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And I thought to myself, Paula Cooper didn't know what she was doing. Somebody in their right mind doesn't take a 12-inch butcher knife and stab somebody 33 times. But what happened that day at Nana's house was a crazy, 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 senseless act. And I said to myself, my faith is calling me to forgiveness. And maybe someday I will. But once again, I began to picture this beautiful picture of Nana. And there was no doubt in my mind that the tears that I saw coming out of her eyes were tears of love and compassion. And I felt Nana wanted someone in my family to have that same sort of love and compassion. And I felt like I fell on my shoulders. But even though I knew forgiveness was the right thing, I didn't have a bit of love and compassion. Because Paul Cooper had brutally, heinously murdered Nana. But so convinced that's what Nana would have wanted. And those tears I pictured in her eyes had a great impact on me. And I felt if I didn't at least try to generate some sort of compassion, whenever I think about Nana again, I'd feel guilty that I hadn't tried. And I didn't want to feel guilty when I thought about Nana. So as I sat up and prayed that night, with tears coming out of my eyes and streaming down my cheeks, I begged my God to please, please, please give me love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family, and do that on behalf of Nana. And I prayed in Jesus' name. And I began to think, well, I could write this girl a letter. I could tell her about Nana. I could share Nana's faith with her. And I realized that my prayer of compassion had been answered, because I knew that I no longer wanted her to die, and I wanted to do whatever I could do to try to help her. And I learned the most important lesson of my life that night. It was about the healing power of forgiveness. Because when my heart was touched with compassion, forgiveness took place. And it brought a tremendous healing. It had been a year and a half since Nana's death. And during that period of a year and a half, whenever I think about Nana, I would envision somebody that I love dearly butchered on the dining room floor of her home. Not only was she stabbed 33 times with a 12-inch butcher knife, but they brought out at the trial, they had a picture of the carpet that had been underneath her body that showed how the carpet had been slashed by the knife. They had pictures of the hardwood floor that was underneath the carpet, showed how that hardwood floor had been splintered and bruised by the knife. I pictured her butchered on the dining room floor for a year and a half. But when God touched my heart with compassion, forgiveness took place. I immediately knew that from that moment on, whenever I thought about Nana again, I no longer picture how she died, but I would picture how she lived and what she stood for, what she believed in, the beautiful, wonderful person she was. And I knew God had done something terrific inside of me, a miracle, if you will. But I knew it was something that didn't happen just so I would feel good for a period of time, but it was something to be shared with other people. And before I left work that night, I made another prayer. And I made God 2 promises. The first promise that I made was that any success that came into my life as a result of forgiving Paula Cooper, I would give God the honor and the glory. Because I knew it wasn't something I had done, it was because God had touched my heart and made that forgiveness possible. The second promise I made, if I had any idea that night what I was promising, I would have been too scared to have done it. But I promised God I would go through any door that opened up as a result of forgiving Paula Cooper. That was November 2nd, 1986, almost 25 years ago. And I can say this night I've kept those 2 promises. And the doors that God has opened have been totally amazing. One of those doors was being able to meet Charity Lee a few months ago on Facebook. I had a friend about 3 or 4 months ago send me a letter. His name was Edward and Mary Rapaji. He was a death row inmate in Uganda. Spent 18 and a half years in prison. He was released when it finally was proved that the man he was accused of killing was still alive. Edward came here to Texas on our journey in 2007. We came here to San Antonio. I got a letter from Edward about 3 or 4 months ago, and he said, "Can a journey folk come to Uganda and help me in my lonely struggle against the death penalty?" Well, the journey doesn't have any money. We have a lot of desires and things we want to do, but I told him, we'll see what happens. And I talked about it to several friends of mine one night at dinner, and the man that was over for dinner, a friend of mine, said, if you want to go to Uganda, I'll send you on frequent flyer miles. And that began the Uganda Journey of Hope, which turned into the Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Texas Journey of Hope. I've been on the road since October 2nd. I get home, I leave tomorrow. And I'll be home for about 3 days until I take off again. One of the events I'm going to be doing in Alabama in January, I just got an email from the lady today, and she said one of the guys on her committee is not going to tell people that I live in Anchorage, Alaska, but he's going to tell them I have a home there, because it seems like pretty much I live on the road a lot. Up to about the middle of December, I'm going to be on the road a lot. But meeting Charity Lee, and Charity being able to come to Africa with us, and hearing her tell her story, I cannot imagine the worst thing happening to somebody than to lose your baby and to have somebody in your family be the killer. To lose her father at an early age, and for her to come from the depths and realizing that the answer is love, and where it's brought her today, and the healing that love has brought. One of the things about the Journey of Hope is we try to be a support organization. And we're trying to help support charity, the Ella Foundation, other organizations like Witness to Innocence. We had 25 or 26 exonerees in Austin. We support the World Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, and the different state coalitions. And a lot of individuals. One of the people that went to Africa with us, Randy Gardner, he has got a nonprofit organization he started called Back to Basic Organic Gardening. And he's got 160 acres, which was kind of a dream of his brother at death row, to help young people and to train them and to get them involved in positive things. So we're trying to help Randy get his organization going. Where we see where someone needs help, we try to help them. This African journey has really meant a lot to me, and one thing I have definitely come to realize, that I am in the middle of the history to abolish the death penalty. The death penalty will be abolished in this country and around the world someday, but we have come so far now, I know that it can't be stopped. It'll happen. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime. And of course, Texas is the toughest place here in this country. There's a lot of places around the country, but one by one are getting rid of the death penalty. 4 states have got rid of the death penalty here in the United States in recent years. The new states, New York, New Jersey, and New Mexico, have all got rid of the death penalty. And in this year, Illinois also got rid of the death penalty. So the trend is to get rid of the death penalty. Even death sentences being given here in Texas is down. The trend worldwide is to get rid of the death penalty. Going to Rwanda was amazing. I'm sure many of you are aware of the great genocide that took place in Rwanda just 15 some years ago. And yet they have come to a point of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of human rights. 4 years ago, the president of Rwanda got rid of the death penalty in Rwanda. If any country said, hey, we need a death penalty, punch all these people, it would have been Rwanda. But Rwanda is becoming a real leader in this world and how we should behave, how we should act. I was really happy to be there. We were in a Congress of 25 different countries from Africa trying to abolish death penalty. The president of Rwanda greeted us. It was a real honor to be there. But I know that I'm in the middle of the history for the abolition of death penalty. Someday it's going to come to an end, and I'm glad I'm part of it. And if you want to get involved, it's really easy. Also, before I close, I'd like to say that tomorrow is Charity's birthday. And for a birthday present, I've been with her since the 3rd or 4th of October. My birthday present, I'm going home. But on the Ella Foundation page, if you have a chance to get online, she put something on there today. If you'd like to give her a birthday wish, you can support Ella. So I think this time we could address some questions, or if somebody else wants to say something. Anything else in that?
Happy birthday.
If you have any questions, I can talk. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Paula Cooper.
My question.
Okay, here we go.
Well, you know, I was at the death penalty forum with you guys last night, and they asked us to write questions. And one of the things that I often reflect on about the death penalty is the fact that, for me, the biggest argument in my mind against the death penalty is the fact that it just makes more victims. Not only the victims of the families, of the family members who were the family members of the original victim, but the victims of the person that's going to be executed as well. And I don't think very many people really think very much about the family members of the victim of the death penalty, and I'd like for you to address that issue.
Yeah, thank you. The family members of death row inmates are basically what we call the forgotten victims. And often, if somebody's on death row, kids, family members, neighborhood mothers tell the kids not to play with his kids. It's a terrible situation how they're treated, because it's like the whole family is guilty, not just the one person that may or may not commit a terrible crime.
That's all I was gonna say. That's where the empathy comes in, you know, because, I mean, having been on both sides, so as a child, I was, you know, maybe the daughter of a murderess, and my father was murdered, and so there was a lot of, you know, shunning and name calling and all that going on. And then when Paris killed Ella, oh, you know, I've been called everything in the book now. And it's just, anything that's going to bring about more trauma, more pain, isn't worth it. And I mean, the murder is murder. Whether the state does it or I do it, murder is murder. And bringing about that kind of trauma is only going to compound the issue. It's not a solution. It's just like a Band-Aid to make people think that they're living in a safer world. But they're not. It's no deterrent. And they're not any safer than they were before. They're just in more pain. Any questions, really?
As far as your son, what was his son?
My son was, so he was 13 when he killed his little sister. So he was ineligible for adult certification, so he was sentenced as a juvenile. He pled true to capital murder, which is the juvenile equivalent of guilty. And he was given the maximum sentence in juvenile can be given. He was sentenced to a 40-year determinate sentence, which means that there is a minimum length of time he must serve, but it's up to him, and his behavior will determine how much after that minimum sentence he has to serve. But he can be held up to 40 years, so potentially till he's 53 years old. He just turned 18 when we were in Africa, and he will be transferred to the adult system by the time he's 19. And if he ever hurts anybody else again, he's not eligible for the death penalty. A long time. I haven't been able to really mother him since he was 13. Almost 5 years. And he's got a long way to go.
How is your son handling it?
Haha. My son is fine. My son, like I said, is 18 years old now, and the general consensus by independent doctors that I've hired and the state of Texas now agrees is that my son is unrehabilitatable. He has no conscience, no remorse, and is a very dangerous person at this point in time. But he's fine. He behaves perfectly. He has a high school diploma and a GED, and I believe is halfway through his college coursework. He tutors other boys at the facilities. He's respectful, polite, extremely helpful to staff. He just possibly wants to kill you. But he's okay. He's actually treated very well. They know who his mom is now.
What is for both of you, the number one thing, or maybe a few things that have helped you cope with your losses overall? I mean, what helped you the most, or what are some things you can think of that really helped you through it?
Help you cope? More than a coping? Well, I mean, ironically enough for me, when it very first happened, is I knew that I still had one child who was breathing, even though he had just murdered his sister. I love my son, and I knew that we were in for a long ride. After my son was sentenced, so about 9 months after the murder, is when I personally went a little crazy for a bit, a couple of years. When I wasn't advocating, I was going insane, and I think the only thing that I got through, or that helped me cope with that, was just love. I loved my children. I knew that I had to make Ella's death meaningful at some point. I made a promise to my kids, and this was way before Paris ever thought about being a murderer, but I made a promise to my kids that, we have our children, hopefully, and the idea should not be, that they're